The clock on the mahogany wall read 12:03 a.m., its muted ticking the only sound in the opulent penthouse living room. Moonlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the glint of the silver cufflinks on the Korean Mafia boss, Joon-Ho's wrists. He leaned casually against the marble countertop, swirling a glass of deep red wine, his sharp eyes fixed on the reflection of the city lights outside. Across the room, Hannah, his lover for the past few months, reclined on the velvet sofa, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. Joon-Ho's phone buzzed insistently on the counter. He glanced at it lazily. The caller ID read Minji, his wife. Hannah noticed the tension flicker in his eyes, subtle but there. "Your wife?" she murmured, her voice a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Nothing important," Joon-Ho replied smoothly, setting the glass down. He ignored the call, letting it ring until it went to voicemail. Hannah's eyes followed the phone, sensing the storm that often brewed beneath his calm exterior. Minutes later, Joon-Ho was halfway through recounting a story from his childhood in Seoul, the one where he learned the delicate balance between power and fear, when his phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a call but a notification, an alert from a local hospital. He didn't read it immediately. Hannah's hand brushed against his as she reached for the wine, and for a fleeting moment he allowed himself the illusion of normalcy. But something in the alert made him pause. He frowned, retrieving his phone, scrolling quickly through the message. His expression stiffened. "Hannah, I need to go," he said quietly, the warmth in his voice replaced by the steely edge of authority. Hannah sat up, alarmed. "What happened?" "My wife. There's been an incident. I need to check on her." The penthouse felt suddenly colder. Hannah could see the conflict in his eyes, the pull between duty and desire. But Joon-Ho didn't hesitate further. Within moments he was dressed, the black coat falling perfectly over his tailored suit. His expression was unreadable, the calm before the storm. The drive to the hospital was tense and silent. Hannah glanced at him occasionally, wondering what had changed in the few minutes since the missed call. Joon-Ho's eyes stayed forward, focused, calculating. The city streets blurred past them, the neon lights reflecting off the sleek black hood of his car. When they arrived, the scene outside the emergency room was chaotic. Nurses and orderlies moved briskly, and the distant wail of sirens hinted at an event far more serious than a minor mishap. Joon-Ho stepped out, his presence commanding immediate respect, even fear from the hospital staff. "Mr. Joon-Ho," one of the attendants said, bowing slightly. "Your wife, she's stable now, but we were worried. She collapsed on the street minutes after your call went unanswered." Joon-Ho's jaw tightened. The words sank in, but he didn't move immediately. Hannah watched him, noting the mix of guilt and controlled anger in his eyes. For a moment he looked human, not the untouchable boss the world saw, but a man confronted with the consequences of his choices. "She's asking for you," the nurse added softly, guiding them to the room. The moment they entered, Minji was there, pale but conscious, her eyes flicking to Joon-Ho with a mixture of fear and relief. Her breath was uneven, the faint sheen of sweat on her forehead catching the harsh fluorescent lights. I called," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know," Joon-Ho said quietly, moving closer. He stopped a step away, the tension in the room thick enough to choke on. "Why didn't you answer?" Minji's lips quivered. I couldn't reach you. I didn't know what to do." Hannah shifted slightly, uncomfortable but silent. She understood now the weight of the moment, the fragility that even a man like Joon-Ho couldn't ignore. Minutes stretched into silence. Then Joon-Ho finally allowed his hand to reach for hers, clasping it firmly. There was no apology in his voice. Mafia bosses rarely gave those, but the gesture was enough. Minji's eyes softened, the fear momentarily easing into tentative trust. Outside the room, the city continued its restless hum. Inside, time seemed to bend, pausing as the consequences of a single ignored call settled over them. Joon-Ho's mind raced, not with business, not with power, but with the raw, unfiltered reality of his personal life colliding with his public persona. Hannah could see the shift. The man who often seemed invincible now displayed vulnerability, a crack in the armor that made her pulse quicken in ways she didn't expect. She wondered, not for the first time, about the boundaries they were navigating, the dangerous, intoxicating line between passion and peril. Joon-Ho stepped back finally, eyes lingering on Minji, reading her emotions as carefully as he read the room during a deal. He didn't speak, but the unspoken message was clear. He would protect, he would act, and yet the choices he made carried consequences that not even he could fully control. The hospital staff, aware of the tension, discreetly left them alone. Minji's hand found his, squeezing lightly, a silent acknowledgement of relief and perhaps a quiet confrontation of the truth. Joon-Ho glanced toward Hannah, who had remained at the edge of the room, and he nodded once, brief, almost imperceptible. He understood. Her presence was tolerated, but the family line was non-negotiable. Outside, the night deepened, the city lights reflecting the duality of Joon-Ho's life. Luxury and danger, desire and duty, control and chaos. Inside, a single moment of neglect had become a turning point, forcing a man used to absolute command to face vulnerability in a way he hadn't in years. And in that suspended moment, the consequences of choice, of passion, and of duty were no longer theoretical. They were immediate, intimate, and unavoidable. The faint beep of monitors, the soft rustle of hospital gowns, and the weight of unspoken words filled the room, setting the stage for a night that would change everything. The hours stretched slowly, each tick of the clock a reminder that life could pivot on the smallest decisions. Min lay in the hospital bed, her hand still lightly pressed over Joon-Ho's as he stood beside her. Hannah lingered near the doorway, silent, aware of the charged atmosphere but unwilling to intrude. I was scared, Minji confessed, her voice fragile. I didn't know what would happen if you didn't answer. Joon-Ho remained quiet for a moment, processing her words. The truth was he had known the risk of ignoring her call, yet the pull of his present, Hannah, the warmth, the escape, had been too strong. Now the reality confronted him. One mistake, one moment of distraction, and the life he valued most was endangered. This won't happen again, he said finally, his voice low, deliberate. It was not just a promise. It was a warning, a statement of fact. In his world, words carried weight. They were binding, not casual. Minji's gaze softened, but Joon-Ho didn't allow himself to linger in sentiment. Outside the room, the city remained unaware of the drama unfolding within the sterile walls. Neon lights flickered over the streets, car horns echoing, a stark contrast to the quiet tension inside. Joon-Ho glanced at Hannah, noting her presence, her curiosity, and perhaps a subtle judgment. You should go, he said to her, his tone carrying authority without hostility. Hannah's eyes flickered with something unspoken, understanding, disappointment, and the hint of longing, but she didn't protest. She moved toward the door, a graceful retreat, leaving Joon-Ho to the private reckoning with his wife. Minji exhaled softly, a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety. I don't understand why you didn't answer, she admitted, tears threatening to spill. Joon-Ho's expression softened for the briefest moment. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hand still holding hers. As I was distracted, I thought, for a moment, that nothing would happen, that I could manage both worlds without consequence. His words were careful, measured, but the honesty behind them was raw. Minji studied him, recognizing the rare vulnerability in the man who controlled fear and respect with the ease of breathing. She wanted to be angry, to demand more than this quiet acknowledgement, but the intensity of the night's events left her drained. I almost lost you, she whispered. Joon-Ho's jaw clenched. And that would have been my fault. They sat in silence, the weight of near tragedy pressing down. The hospital monitor's rhythmic beat became a metronome for reflection. Joon-Ho's mind raced with contingencies, alliances, and the intricate balance of power in his world. Yet in this small sterile room none of that mattered. Only the fragility of human life and the consequences of choice mattered. Minutes passed and Minji's breathing evened out. Joon-Ho finally released her hand, standing and smoothing his coat. He looked out the window, the city sprawling beneath him like a living organism, chaotic, unpredictable, dangerous. He had mastered many elements of this world, but the personal, the intimate, remained perilous, elusive. Hannah's figure disappeared from the doorway, leaving only a faint shadow. Joon-Ho's gaze followed her retreat, and for a moment, a flicker of regret crossed his features. He had chosen distraction over duty, passion over prudence, and now the consequences were evident. A nurse entered quietly, checking Minji's vitals and offering reassurance. Joon-Ho observed closely, his sharp mind noting the details, the medications, the recovery process. His world was one of control and precision. Tonight's events had reminded him that even the most calculated men could be blindsided by human emotion. "Rest now," he instructed Minji gently. "I will stay until the doctors say it's safe to leave." Her eyes softened. I forgive you," she said quietly, though the statement carried the weight of unspoken tension and lingering fear. Outside, the city pulsed with life, indifferent to the intimate drama within the hospital room. But for Joon-Ho and Minji, time had shifted irreversibly. The night had been a lesson in fragility, a reminder that the balance between love, duty and danger was razor-thin. Joon-Ho moved to the chair by her bedside, sitting with the poise and authority that defined him. He didn't speak, didn't attempt to justify himself beyond the acknowledgement of the risk he had taken. Silence filled the space, dense but not uncomfortable, an interlude of understanding between husband and wife, complicated by the shadows of infidelity, desire and unspoken fears. Minji's fingers twined with his, holding on not just for comfort but as a lifeline, a tether in a world that had proven once again that control was an illusion. Hours passed and the first hints of dawn crept over the city skyline. Joon-Ho finally rose, checking his watch. The night's chaos had subsided, leaving only the aftermath, the quiet, contemplative space where decisions would have to be made, where apologies and promises were weighed against desire and duty. Minji's eyes followed him, searching for reassurance, for certainty, for a glimpse of the man she had married. He turned to her, and for a fleeting moment, vulnerability gave way to the unshakable presence of authority. "We will move forward," he stated, simple, direct. "But nothing will be the same. Not for us, not for anyone involved." Minji nodded, understanding the gravity behind the words. Change was inevitable. The night had proven it. Yet in that understanding, there was also a strange comfort. A recognition that, despite danger, despite betrayal, they were still tethered together by circumstance and choice. The hospital room grew quiet, filled with the soft hum of machines and the gentle rhythm of breathing. Joon-Ho's eyes lingered on Minji, a mixture of regret, determination and an unspoken promise. Outside, the city began to wake, unaware of the near tragedy that had unfolded in the stillness of the night. By mid-morning, the hospital corridor had transformed from the tense stillness of the night into a steady hum of activity. Nurses wheeled patients past Joon-Ho as he remained in Minji's room, a silent sentinel. He watched her sleep lightly, her hand resting over the blanket, a fragile image of vulnerability that contrasted sharply with the world he controlled outside these walls. Hannah had not returned and Joon-Ho felt a subtle relief. Her presence had been a temptation, a reminder of desire, but the events of the night had clarified priorities. Minji's well-being was non-negotiable, and any indulgence of personal impulses would have to wait. As she stirred, blinking awake to the soft morning light, Joon-Ho leaned slightly forward. "Good morning," he said, his tone unusually gentle, stripped of the usual sharpness that accompanied his commands. Minji's eyes met his, still clouded with residual fear, but there was also warmth, a flicker of trust beginning to rekindle. "Morning," she whispered, her voice husky. "Did you stay here all night?" "I did," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "Until the doctors were sure you were stable." His words were simple, but in his world, simplicity carried weight. Protection, loyalty, and authority, all expressed in a single, deliberate statement. The nurse entered briefly to check her vitals and left, leaving them alone once again. Joon-Ho observed Minji closely, noting the faint lines of exhaustion, the subtle pallor of her skin, and the quiet determination in her eyes. Despite the night's ordeal, she was resilient, and he admired her silently. "You must be tired," he said after a pause, his voice softer now, almost conversational. "Sleep some more." Minji shook her head faintly. I need to talk to you. About last night, about everything." Joon-Ho's jaw tightened slightly. This was the moment he had anticipated, the confrontation, the reckoning. "Then speak," he said simply, leaning back against the wall, arms crossed. Authority tempered with patience. Her voice trembled initially, fragile like the first notes of a song, but strengthened as she continued. I don't understand why you were with her, while I was calling for you." Joon-Ho met her gaze steadily. "Hannah is not the reason," he said firmly. "The reason is me. My choices." I thought I could handle both worlds. I was wrong. Minji's lips parted, a mix of anger and relief swirling in her expression. You could have lost me, because of your pride, your selfishness. You didn't think of me. He inhaled slowly, the weight of the accusation sinking in. I did think of you, he replied, quieter now. I thought of what would happen if I left. I thought of everything, but not everything is under control. Not all consequences are predictable. His eyes softened momentarily. But I am here now. And I will not fail you again. The tension between them remained palpable. Minji wanted to forgive, to trust, but the night's events had left a deep imprint. Still, the sincerity in Joon-Ho's voice, the uncharacteristic vulnerability he displayed, slowly began to bridge the distance. I want to believe you, she admitted, her voice small. But this scares me. What if it happens again? It won't, he said almost too firmly, and yet there was no arrogance in the statement, only commitment. He reached for her hand, brushing the knuckles lightly. I will ensure it doesn't. Your safety, your life, your peace. It is my responsibility. Not optional. Not negotiable. Minji exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing fractionally. For the first time since the collapse, she allowed herself to trust, if only a little. The mixture of fear, anger, and love that had been brewing all night began to settle into cautious understanding. The hours passed slowly, each moment a test of endurance. Joon-Ho maintained a quiet presence, a guardian figure, while Minji rested. When she finally managed to sit up, she found him still there, calm and patient, as if time had slowed to match her pace. Do you ever rest? She asked lightly, attempting to deflect the intensity of their conversation with humor. He allowed himself a rare, faint smile. I rest when necessary, he replied, his tone carrying amusement beneath the steel. But tonight was necessary to stay awake. And to ensure you were safe. Minji's lips curved faintly. There was a brief lightness to her, the first glimmer of relief since the ordeal began. Yet beneath it all there was still awareness. Joon-Ho's world was dangerous, his choices often morally ambiguous, and his devotion could not erase the risks surrounding them. By afternoon, Minji's condition improved sufficiently for a brief discharge. Doctors cautioned her to remain at home and avoid stress, but Joon-Ho knew that she was more resilient than they realized. He arranged for her private transport, a sleek black sedan waiting outside. As they exited the hospital, the sun casting a golden glow over the city, the contrast between the danger of last night and the serenity of daylight felt surreal. Hannah appeared briefly outside the hospital entrance, observing discreetly. Joon-Ho noticed but did not acknowledge her presence. The decision had been made. Boundaries would be maintained and the night's events would be respected, even if unspoken tensions lingered. As Minji settled into the car, Joon-Ho leaned down, voice low and firm. Rest. I will check in later. And, be careful. His words were both protection and warning. She nodded, her hand gripping his lightly, silently acknowledging their complex bond. The car pulled away, leaving Joon-Ho standing on the sidewalk, the weight of the night pressing against him once more. He did not move immediately. The city stretched before him, a web of opportunity, danger, and influence, yet his mind lingered on the fragility of life and the price of distraction. In the world he commanded, mistakes were often fatal. But personal mistakes carried a weight that no wealth or power could erase. Hannah approached cautiously, her steps measured. Are you okay? She asked softly, aware of the intensity he carried even in moments of silence. I am fine, he replied without turning, voice calm but authoritative. And you should leave. I have matters to attend to. Her eyes flickered with curiosity, concern, and unspoken longing. She hesitated but eventually retreated, leaving Joon-Ho to the solitude of his thoughts. The night's events had left an imprint not just on his marriage, but on his perspective, his priorities, and the fragility of human connection in a world governed by power. Later, in the quiet of his office, Joon-Ho reflected on the night's lessons. The balance between personal desire and duty had been tested, and the consequences were a stark reminder. Even the most controlled life could be disrupted by a single choice. He leaned back in his leather chair, hands steepled, mind racing with scenarios, contingencies, and moral calculations. Minji's well-being was now an explicit priority, a rule he would enforce with unwavering precision. Yet the presence of Hannah, the allure of distraction, remained an unresolved variable, a complication he would have to navigate carefully. The city outside sparkled, indifferent to the private dramas of a man who wielded power with absolute authority. But within the confines of Joon-Ho's mind, the night had rewritten boundaries, reshaped priorities, and introduced a tension that would linger, guiding every subsequent decision. Even as he drafted emails, coordinated operations, and made the seemingly endless calculations of his empire, the memory of Minji's pale face, the fear in her eyes, and the fragile grasp of her hand remained, a stark reminder that power and love, protection and neglect, were constantly in collision. By evening, a brief message from Minji arrived. "Thank you for staying. I feel safer now." Joon-Ho read it, setting his phone aside. The message was short, simple, yet it carried weight. A quiet acknowledgement of trust, a tentative step toward reconciliation. And in the silence that followed, he understood. The events of the night had shifted something irreversibly, forcing him to confront vulnerabilities he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. The city moved on as it always did, but Joon-Ho's world had changed. And the repercussions of choice, desire, and duty would ripple forward, altering not just the course of his empire, but the fragile, dangerous balance of love and life that he now had to navigate. The following days were tense, each hour a reminder of the night that had shaken the delicate balance of Joon-Ho's life. Minji remained home under strict instructions to rest, but the shadow of fear lingered in her every movement. Joon-Ho checked in frequently, his presence constant yet measured, a silent assertion that her safety was paramount. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of her apartment as she sat by the window, watching the city come alive. Her mind replayed the events over and over. Her collapse on the street, the hospital, the way Joon-Ho had stared at her with controlled intensity, balancing anger, guilt, and care all at once. The experience had shaken her, forcing her to confront emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Fear, relief, and an undeniable attachment to the man who had so effortlessly dominated both her heart and life. Her phone buzzed, breaking the reverie. Joon-Ho's name flashed across the screen. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the call button. Part of her wanted reassurance. Part of her wanted distance. Finally she answered. "Min," his voice came through, calm, measured, yet carrying the subtle tension of concern. "How are you feeling?" I'm fine," she replied, though her voice betrayed the lingering anxiety. "Still a little shaken." "You have every right to be," he said quietly. "Last night, it should never have happened. I failed to act and I take full responsibility." She swallowed hard. "It wasn't all you. I don't know. I don't want to feel that scared again." "I understand," he replied, tone low, deliberate. "And you won't. I will make certain of it. But we must also accept that life, my life, comes with dangers that cannot always be predicted." The words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the duality of the world Joon-Ho commanded. Power, control, and constant risk. Yet in the quiet moments of their conversation, there was also reassurance, a recognition that despite moral ambiguity and the threats surrounding them, there was a tether that connected them, a fragile but unbreakable bond. Later that afternoon, Joon-Ho arrived at Minji's apartment in his sleek black car, the city reflecting on its polished surface like a mirrored world of danger and opportunity. He entered without announcement, a calculated decision to maintain authority and presence. Minji looked up from her seat on the couch, startled but not entirely afraid. She had grown used to his unannounced appearances, though each one still carried a charge of tension. "You should be resting," he said softly, removing his coat and hanging it with deliberate care. "I am resting," she replied, forcing a smile. "But I need to talk." He moved to sit across from her, maintaining a deliberate distance. "Then speak." The conversation began tentatively, cautious probing at the edges of their shared experience. Minji's questions were honest, tinged with fear, curiosity, and lingering anger. Joon-Ho answered each with precision, his words both protective and controlling, yet imbued with a rare vulnerability that made her pause. "I don't understand why you let yourself be distracted," she said finally, her eyes searching his. "Why didn't you think of me first?" Joon-Ho's gaze hardened, a flicker of his usual intensity breaking through. "Because sometimes even I make mistakes. Even I forget priorities. But I won't forget again. Not just my wife Minji. You are the anchor to the life I control. I cannot allow harm to come to you. The room grew quiet as the weight of his words settled. Minji felt a mixture of fear, awe, and attraction. The magnetic pull of a man who combined danger, authority, and unexpected tenderness. Her pulse quickened despite herself, a reminder that love in Joon-Ho's world was rarely gentle or predictable. I need to trust you, she admitted softly, voice barely above a whisper. But it's hard. After last night, I don't know if I can fully. You will, he said quietly, leaning forward slightly. Trust is built through action, not words. I will prove it to you. Every day if necessary. But you must also accept that some elements of my life cannot be fully shielded from you. The statement lingered in the air, a delicate balance between warning and promise. Minji nodded slowly, acknowledging the reality she was entering. A life intertwined with danger, power, and a man who could command fear as easily as devotion. The evening brought unexpected news. One of Joon-Ho's associates had intercepted intelligence indicating a potential threat to their family's operations, a rival faction making moves in the city. Joon-Ho's demeanor shifted instantly, the controlled calm giving way to calculated intensity. He briefed Minji briefly, keeping details minimal but enough to convey the seriousness of the situation. This is why I cannot afford distraction, he said softly, voice low but firm. Every choice has consequences. You must understand that, Minji. Your life, our lives, they are tied to risks you may not fully grasp yet. Minji absorbed the weight of his words. The juxtaposition of romance and danger, protection and threat, fascinated and terrified her simultaneously. She realized that loving Joon-Ho meant accepting not just the man but the world he inhabited, a world where power, loyalty, and survival intersected with passion and morality. Night fell, draping the city in shadows. Joon-Ho left briefly to handle urgent business, instructing Minji to remain inside and avoid exposure. As she watched him disappear into the darkness, she felt the pull of emotion, fear, longing, and a reluctant admiration. He was both protector and enigma. A man whose life was defined by authority, yet whose heart now seemed inextricably tied to hers. Alone, Minji reflected on the past few days. The collapse, the hospital, the confessions, the raw intensity of their connection. She understood now that life with Joon-Ho would never be ordinary. It would be marked by suspense, moral ambiguity, and moments of intimacy that carried the weight of danger. And yet she could not deny the magnetic pull she felt, the undeniable attraction that intertwined with respect and fear. Late into the night, a message arrived from Joon-Ho. I will return soon. Trust in this. You are safe and I will make certain it remains so. Minji read it repeatedly, the words both comforting and tense. She realized that trust in his world was not about certainty, but about faith in his actions and intentions. A faith that demanded courage, patience, and acceptance of danger. As she finally settled into sleep, the city outside remained alive and indifferent, unaware of the intimate dramas that defined the lives of those within. Minji drifted into a restless slumber, her thoughts tangled with fear, desire, and anticipation, knowing that Joon-Ho's return would bring both reassurance and new challenges. In the penthouse office, Joon-Ho stood overlooking the city, plans and contingencies flowing through his mind. His thoughts were divided between business and the woman he had nearly lost, the night's events reinforcing a hard truth. In his world, personal attachment was a vulnerability, and yet one he could no longer ignore. The stakes were higher now, the threads of power, protection, and passion intertwined more tightly than ever. Joon-Ho's empire demanded attention, strategy, and precision, but his heart, an element he rarely acknowledged, was irrevocably tethered to Minji. And as dawn approached, he understood that the choices he made in the coming hours would shape not just his empire, but the fragile, dangerous, and intoxicating bond he shared with the woman he was determined to protect. The morning arrived with a quiet tension, a deceptive calm that Joon-Ho knew rarely lasted more than a few hours in his world. Minji remained home, the echoes of last night's fear still lingering in her every movement. She moved through her apartment with deliberate caution, each sound outside the window, footsteps on the pavement, the distant hum of a car engine, setting her nerves on edge. Joon-Ho's black sedan arrived precisely at 10:30 a.m., its sleek form glinting in the sunlight. He stepped out with the calculated precision of a man whose life depended on timing and authority. The familiar weight of his presence in the doorway sent a shiver through Minji, a mixture of fear, relief, and something deeper, more compelling that she refused to name aloud. "Are you ready?" he asked, voice low but firm, carrying the subtle tension of command. Minji nodded, gripping the strap of her bag. She knew the day would not be simple, that the shadows of his empire would inevitably encroach upon their fragile semblance of normality. But she also knew she could not retreat completely. The night's events had tethered her to him in ways that defied reason. The ride through the city was silent at first. Joon-Ho's eyes scanned the streets, his mind calculating potential threats, contingencies, and strategies even as Minji sat beside him, watching the familiar skyline pass by. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, to probe the reasons behind last night's near tragedy, but every instinct warned caution. Finally she ventured, Why didn't you answer my call? I mean, I understand you were busy, but..." Joon-Ho's hand brushed lightly over hers, cutting off the words before they could fully form. "I made a mistake," he said, voice clipped, firm yet tinged with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "And I will not make it again. Your life is my responsibility, Minji. That is not optional." Minji absorbed the weight of his statement, feeling the pull of his authority, the magnetic intensity that always seemed to surround him. Her pulse quickened, a mixture of fear and desire intertwining, the duality of their relationship laying bare in every glance, every word. The car arrived at a discreet warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place Minji had been warned never to enter alone. Joon-Ho led her inside, the interior lit dimly, the air thick with the scent of oil, metal, and subtle traces of gunpowder, a stark reminder of the world he commanded. "Why are we here?" she asked cautiously, her eyes scanning the shadows for threats, for any sign of danger. "There's a situation that requires my attention," he said without elaboration, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I need you close but safe. Do not move unless I instruct you to." Minji nodded, her heart racing. The tension was palpable, and yet the proximity to him, the way his presence dominated the room, stirred something inside her she hadn't anticipated. She realized, with a mixture of fear and fascination, that danger and attraction were often inseparable in Joon-Ho's world. Minutes later, a group of his associates emerged from the shadows, briefing him on a potential breach in the organization's territory. Joon-Ho listened intently, absorbing every detail, every nuance, his mind working with calculated precision. Minji watched silently, absorbing the gravity of the situation. The stakes were higher than she had imagined, the consequences of failure potentially catastrophic. Suddenly the doors burst open. A rival faction had arrived earlier than expected, their intent unmistakable. Joon-Ho's expression hardened, and in a fluid motion he drew a weapon from beneath his coat, his movements precise, controlled, and lethal. "Stay behind me," he instructed Minji, voice low, authoritative. She complied without hesitation, her fear heightened but tempered by trust. Trust in the man whose life she now realized was inseparably linked to hers. The confrontation was swift, violent, yet controlled. Joon-Ho's associates executed their roles with lethal efficiency, neutralizing threats with practiced skill. Minji watched, heart pounding, aware that every moment carried risk, yet unable to look away. The danger was intoxicating, terrifying, and compelling all at once. When the dust settled, the warehouse silent once more, Joon-Ho approached Minji. His coat bore subtle signs of the conflict, his eyes sharp, yet there was a softer edge in his gaze directed at her. "You were brave," he said quietly, almost imperceptibly, the praise carrying weight because it was rare, deliberate, and earned. I just stayed out of the way," she replied, voice trembling slightly, though her eyes betrayed pride and relief. "No," he said firmly. "You stayed where you needed to. That counts. In my world, survival and awareness are as important as skill and strength. You did well." The tension between them lingered, charged and electric. Minji felt the pull of his proximity, the magnetic intensity that always seemed to radiate from him, and she realized with reluctant clarity that danger and attraction were inseparably intertwined. As they left the warehouse, the sun dipping low over the horizon, painting the city in shades of gold and crimson, Minji allowed herself a moment of reflection. The events of the day had reinforced everything she had begun to understand. Life with Joon-Ho was perilous, intoxicating, and unpredictable, yet it was also profoundly compelling. Back at her apartment, Joon-Ho ensured her safety personally before departing. He did not linger, yet the weight of his presence remained, an unspoken promise of protection and control. Minji watched him leave, the echoes of adrenaline still thrumming in her veins, aware that her world had shifted irrevocably. She sank onto the couch, the adrenaline giving way to exhaustion. The past few days, the collapse, the hospital, the confrontation, and now the near-violent encounter, had left her mentally and emotionally raw. Yet beneath the fear and fatigue was a strange exhilaration, a recognition that love, danger, and trust were now inseparably entwined in ways she had never imagined. Late that night, a message appeared on her phone. "You were perfect today. Trust that I am always near. Joon-Ho." Minji read it repeatedly, the words both reassuring and tense. Trust in his world was not a simple act. It was a measured risk, a conscious decision to surrender to the intensity of a life defined by power, danger, and unspoken passion. And yet she realized she was willing to take that risk, to step further into the world Joon-Ho commanded, despite the fear, because the alternative, a life apart, was unthinkable. As she finally drifted into sleep, the city lights twinkled outside her window, oblivious to the intricate dance of power, protection, and desire that defined the night. Minji's dreams were restless, filled with shadows, echoes of danger, and the magnetic pull of the man who had saved her life and perhaps unknowingly claimed her heart. In the penthouse, Joon-Ho stood by the window, watching the city in silence. His mind was already calculating, anticipating potential threats. Yet part of him lingered on Minji, her safety, her vulnerability, the complex, undeniable connection that now bound them. The night's events had reinforced a lesson he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. Love in his world was a dangerous luxury, but one he could no longer deny. And as darkness enveloped the city, both of them understood that the consequences of choice, the pull of desire, and the imperatives of survival were now intertwined, shaping not only their relationship but the delicate balance of power and passion that defined their lives. The night settled over the city like a velvet curtain, the streets below alive with the muted hum of nightlife, indifferent to the storms unfolding in the lives of those above. Joon-Ho returned to Minji's apartment quietly, his movements precise, calculated, and deliberate, as if even a whisper could disrupt the fragile balance of the evening. Minji was awake, seated near the window, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. She glanced at him as he entered, a mixture of relief, apprehension, and longing threading her expression. The events of the past days had reshaped everything. Her sense of security, her understanding of love, and the unspoken gravity of the choices now binding her to him. "You're here," she said softly, voice barely above a whisper. "I never left," Joon-Ho replied, his tone low, authoritative, yet carrying an unusual warmth. He moved to stand near her, careful to respect the delicate tension that now existed between them. "But I needed to ensure everything is safe before returning." Minji's gaze lingered on him, tracing the sharp angles of his face, the controlled intensity in his eyes, the subtle hints of fatigue from the previous day's conflicts. She realized fully now that danger and desire were inseparable in his world, that to love him was to accept the constant proximity of risk. I don't know how to feel," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Fear, relief, admiration. I think I'm all of it at once." Joon-Ho's expression softened, though only subtly. "You are allowed to feel all of it," he said. "You survived yesterday, today, and will survive tomorrow because you are stronger than you realize. But understand this, your life, your safety, they are my responsibility. Not optional. Not negotiable." The sincerity in his words struck her, bridging the gap between fear and trust. She reached out, hesitating for a moment before placing her hand over his. The contact was electric, a silent acknowledgement of connection, of shared experience and unspoken promise. Outside, the city's pulse continued, indifferent to the intensity within. Yet within the apartment, time seemed to stretch, each moment heavy with significance. Joon-Ho studied her, noting the subtle ways she had changed over the past days. More aware, more cautious, but also more resilient, a partner who could, if necessary, navigate the treacherous world he controlled. Suddenly, a soft beep from her phone interrupted the quiet. A message from an unknown number appeared. "The past will not stay buried. Tonight decisions will be tested." Minji's eyes widened. Joon-Ho moved instantly, his body a machine of controlled alertness. "Show me," he commanded, voice low, commanding immediate compliance. Minji held the phone out and he scanned the message quickly. His expression hardened, his mind racing through possibilities, contingencies, and the subtle signals of imminent danger. "This is a warning," he muttered, tone clipped. "Someone knows about last night, about the disruption in our operations. We must act decisively." Minji's heart raced, caught between fear and a strange sense of anticipation. She had grown accustomed to danger over the past days, yet the immediacy of the threat brought a rush she could not entirely suppress. Joon-Ho moved with precision, instructing her to remain inside, locked and secure. He retrieved his weapon and a discreet communication device, preparing for the confrontation that was inevitable. Minji watched silently, aware of her helplessness but trusting in the man whose presence now dominated her world completely. Minutes later, the faint sound of footsteps echoed outside. Joon-Ho's associates were already in position, but he needed to confront the threat personally. He moved toward the door, every muscle coiled, every sense alert. The world outside was a maze of shadows, each movement carrying potential peril. The confrontation was brief, brutal, and efficient. Rival operatives attempted to breach the perimeter, but Joon-Ho's planning and precision ensured no casualties among his inner circle. Minji observed from the safety of her locked apartment, her breath held tight in her chest, heart racing as the tension unfolded before her. When the final threat was neutralized, Joon-Ho returned, his expression calm yet charged with residual intensity. He moved to her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "It's over," he said quietly. "You're safe. I promise." Minji exhaled, relief flooding her body, mingled with adrenaline and a strange exhilaration. The danger had been real, immediate, and terrifying, but the experience also reinforced a truth she had begun to accept. Life with Joon-Ho was never ordinary. It was perilous, intoxicating, and compelling in ways she could not resist. I don't know what to say," she admitted, voice trembling. You put yourself at risk for me." Joon-Ho's eyes softened slightly. "I always will," he said, voice low, carrying both authority and tenderness. "Because you matter more than anything else in my world. But understand this, our life is not safe, not simple. Danger will always follow, and love is a risk." The admission hung in the air, heavy with weight and truth. Minji nodded slowly, realizing that to fully embrace this relationship meant accepting the risk, the uncertainty, and the moral ambiguities that defined him. And yet she found herself willing, drawn by the intensity, protection, and undeniable passion he exuded. Joon-Ho leaned closer, eyes locking with hers. "Do you trust me?" he asked, voice almost a whisper. "Yes," she replied without hesitation, the word carrying courage, surrender, and a deep acknowledgement of their bond. He allowed a rare smile, brief but sincere, before closing the distance and pressing a gentle, deliberate kiss to her forehead. It was a gesture of both reassurance and authority, a reminder that despite the chaos, despite danger, they were tethered together by choice, trust, and undeniable connection. The night deepened, and the city outside continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware of the intimate drama unfolding within. Minji sat beside him, the adrenaline ebbing, replaced by a calm that came from survival, trust, and understanding. "You will not leave me again?" she asked softly, almost fearing the answer. "I will never leave you," Joon-Ho replied firmly. "Not unless I am forced. And even then I will return. You are my priority, my responsibility, and the only one I will protect without compromise." The words were simple, yet carried the full weight of his authority, the depth of his emotions, and the calculated certainty of a man who knew the value of loyalty, love, and life. They sat together as the city's lights flickered and shimmered, the silence between them comfortable, charged, and profound. In that moment, the past night's fear, the adrenaline of confrontation, and the uncertainty of future threats fused into a fragile, yet undeniable bond. Minji realized fully that love in Joon-Ho's world was never simple. It was a collision of desire, danger, and devotion. A high-stakes game where trust was both shield and weapon. And yet she was ready to embrace it, to step into the intensity, the chaos, and the passion because the alternative, a life without him, was unimaginable. Joon-Ho's presence remained a constant, both protector and enigma, his gaze softening only slightly as he absorbed the reality of their connection. Outside, the city pulsed with life, unaware that in one apartment love, danger, and trust had intertwined irrevocably, creating a bond that neither time nor circumstance could easily unravel. As dawn approached, Minji rested against him, finally allowing herself to breathe fully, her fear tempered by the unwavering presence of the man who had not only saved her life but had claimed her heart. Joon-Ho in turn felt the rare unspoken weight of responsibility, desire and care, a balance he rarely acknowledged but now embraced fully. And in that quiet, charged moment, they both understood. The night had tested them, the danger had defined them, and the bond they shared was now unbreakable, forged in fire, trust and undeniable passion.